The thunderous sound of hooves echoed through the vast prairie as Thomas Ashford raced toward the horizon, his stallion kicking up clouds of dust in the fading light of 1875 Wyoming territory. Blood trickled down his arm from the bullet graze, but he pressed on, the stolen bank ledger tucked securely inside his jacket, evidence that would clear his name and bring the real thieves to justice. Rebecca Rayburn stood on her porch, rifle in hand, as the lone rider approached her isolated homestead. Widowed for 3 years with an 8-year-old daughter to raise, she had learned to be cautious of strangers. The setting sun cast long shadows across the land she had fought to keep after her husband's death, illuminating the determination in her eyes as she watched the wounded man slow his horse. "State your business, mister," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard with practiced authority. Thomas raised his uninjured arm, wincing as he brought his horse to a stop. "Just passing through, madam, looking for a place to rest before continuing to Silver Creek. I can pay." Rebecca studied him carefully. His clothes were dusty but of good quality, and despite the blood staining his sleeve, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a gentleman, not the dangerous air of an outlaw. Her daughter, Emma, peeked out from behind her skirts, curious eyes watching the stranger. "You're bleeding," Rebecca stated flatly. "Just a graze. Had a disagreement with some men who didn't appreciate my questions about certain financial matters at the bank in Rosewood." Thomas met her gaze steadily. Something in his honest eyes made Rebecca lower her rifle slightly. "I've got clean water and bandages. You can use the barn for the night, one night only." "Much obliged, madam." Thomas dismounted carefully, leading his horse toward the barn. Rebecca turned to her daughter. "Emma, fetch the medical kit from the kitchen cabinet." The young girl nodded and darted inside while Rebecca kept a watchful eye on the stranger. Something about his manner intrigued her, though she'd learned the hard way not to trust too easily in this unforgiving land. Thomas secured his horse in the barn, making sure the ledger remained hidden in his saddlebag. As a former bookkeeper turned investigator, he had been tracking discrepancies in several frontier banks linked to a powerful cattle baron. The bullet wound was a clear indication he was getting close to the truth. Rebecca appeared at the barn entrance, medical supplies in hand. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to a hay bale. Thomas complied, removing his jacket and rolling up his bloodied sleeve. Rebecca worked with efficient movements, cleaning the wound with a gentleness that belied her stern demeanor. "You have skilled hands, Mrs. Rayburn." "Rebecca Rayburn." She focused on bandaging his arm. "And you are Thomas Ashford. Thank you for your kindness." Rebecca secured the bandage. "There's stew on the stove. You can join us for supper before settling in the barn." Inside the modest cabin, Emma sat wide-eyed at the dinner table, watching Thomas with undisguised curiosity. The cabin was simple but well kept, with handmade curtains and a bookshelf full of worn volume signs of civilization maintained against the wilderness. "Are you a real cowboy?" Emma asked as her mother served the stew. Thomas smiled. "Not exactly. I'm more comfortable with numbers than cattle." "Numbers?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "I was a bookkeeper in Denver before." Thomas paused, "before circumstances led me elsewhere." Rebecca studied him. "A bookkeeper who gets shot at is unusual in these parts. Some numbers tell stories people would kill to keep hidden." Thomas sipped his water. "Your daughter mentioned reading earlier. She seems quite bright." Rebecca's expression softened as she glanced at Emma. "Her father believed in education. We read together every night." After supper, Thomas thanked them and retreated to the barn. He examined the ledger by lantern light, confirming his suspicions about the missing funds that had been blamed on him. Tomorrow, he would continue to Silver Creek, where he hoped to find the final evidence needed. Later that night, as Rebecca tucked Emma into bed, the girl asked for her nightly story. "Can Mr. Ashford read to me tonight? He has a nice voice." Rebecca hesitated. "Emma, he's a stranger. Please, Mama, just one story." After a moment's consideration, Rebecca nodded. "Let me ask him." She found Thomas in the barn, studying papers by lamplight. When she explained Emma's request, surprise flickered across his face, followed by a genuine smile that transformed his features. "I'd be honored," he said, carefully folding his papers and following her to the cabin. Emma sat up eagerly in her small bed as they entered. Rebecca handed Thomas her husband's worn copy of The Adventures of Robin Hood, one of Emma's favorites. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed and began reading quickly, his voice clear but rushed, the words tumbling out as if he were racing through a task. Rebecca watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. After a page, she stepped forward and gently took the book from his hands. "Start again," she said softly, "slower this time." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a shared wound. Thomas nodded, taking the book back. This time, he read with deliberate care, giving each word its due, his rich voice bringing the forest of Sherwood to life in the small frontier bedroom. Emma's eyes grew heavy, and by the third page she was asleep. Rebecca walked Thomas back to the barn in silence, the stars brilliant overhead in the clear Wyoming sky. "You've done this before," she observed. "Read bedtime stories." Thomas looked away. "I had a daughter once and a wife." Rebecca didn't press further. "Good night, Mr. Ashford." "Good night, Mrs. Rayburn." Dawn arrived with a commotion of hoofbeats and men's voices. Rebecca woke with a start, grabbing her rifle before rushing outside. 5 mounted men, led by Sheriff Mills from Rosewood, surrounded her yard. "Morning, Mrs. Rayburn," the sheriff called. "We're looking for a fugitive. Thomas Ashford, bank robber, seen him." Rebecca's heart pounded. "What's he done?" "Stole from the Rosewood Bank and shot a guard. Man's in critical condition." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "So, have you seen him?" Thomas appeared from the barn, hands raised. "I'm Thomas Ashford, Sheriff, but I didn't rob any bank or shoot anyone. I can prove who the real thieves are." The sheriff dismounted. "Hand over the ledger, Ashford. Mr. Blackwell wants his property back." "Victor Blackwell is the thief," Thomas countered. "This ledger proves he's been embezzling from banks across 3 territories." The sheriff drew his pistol. "Don't make this difficult." Rebecca stepped forward, her rifle steady. "Sheriff Mills, I've known Victor Blackwell's reputation longer than you've worn that badge. If Mr. Ashford says he has evidence, maybe you should look at it before dragging him back." "Stand aside, Mrs. Rayburn. This isn't your concern." "It is when armed men surround my home and threaten a guest." Her voice remained calm, but her eyes were steel. "Emma, stay inside." The tension crackled in the morning air. Thomas slowly reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the leather-bound ledger. "Look at the entries on page 43, Sheriff. Compare them with the official records." Blackwell's been siphoning money through false loans, then covering his tracks by claiming robberies. "The guard wasn't shot by me, he was shot by Blackwell's men to create a diversion." The sheriff hesitated, then took the ledger with his free hand. After a tense moment, he began thumbing through the pages. His expression changed as he read, brow furrowing. "These numbers don't add up," he muttered. "Exactly," Thomas said. "And if you wire the federal marshal in Denver, you'll find I was working with him to investigate a string of similar thefts." One of the mounted men shifted nervously. "Sheriff, Blackwell said to bring him back, no questions asked." "Shut up, Parker." The sheriff continued reading. "These entries match some suspicious withdrawals I've questioned before. He looked up at Thomas. "If this is true—" "It is," Thomas insisted. "And there's more. Check the last page." The sheriff turned to the final entry, his eyes widening. "This is Blackwell's signature, authorizing a transfer of $50,000 to an account in San Francisco. Money that disappeared from 3 different banks, reported as robbery losses," Thomas explained. Rebecca kept her rifle ready, watching the mounted men carefully. "Sheriff, you have a duty to investigate the truth, not just follow orders from the richest man in the territory." After a long moment, Sheriff Mills lowered his pistol. "Parker, ride back to town. Tell Judge Wilson we need to review the bank records immediately. The rest of you stand down." He turned to Thomas. "You'll need to come to town to make a formal statement." "I'll be there," Thomas promised. "As soon as I've recovered my strength. Mrs. Rayburn can vouch for my whereabouts until then." The sheriff nodded reluctantly. "2 days, Ashford, then I expect you in my office." He mounted his horse and led his men away, the ledger secured in his saddlebag. When they had disappeared down the road, Rebecca finally lowered her rifle, her hands trembling slightly. "You just stood up to the sheriff and Victor Blackwell for a man you met yesterday," Thomas said quietly. "Why?" Rebecca's gaze met his. "Because I've seen what powerful men can do when no one questions them. My husband died standing up to Blackwell when he tried to force smaller ranchers to sell." She turned toward the cabin. "You should come inside. Emma will want breakfast, and you need to tell me the whole story." Over the next 2 days, Thomas recovered his strength while sharing the details of his investigation with Rebecca. He had been a respected bookkeeper in Denver until he noticed irregularities in accounts connected to Blackwell's enterprises. When he reported his findings, he found himself framed for the theft, forcing him to flee with what evidence he could gather. Rebecca listened with growing interest, recognizing in Thomas the same integrity that had defined her late husband. For his part, Thomas found himself drawn to her quiet strength and the loving way she raised her daughter despite the harsh demands of frontier life. On the evening before Thomas was due to ride into Rosewood, Emma insisted on another bedtime story. This time, when Thomas took the book, he read with natural rhythm and feeling, bringing the characters to life. Rebecca watched from the doorway, something warm and unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Later they sat on the porch, the vast Wyoming sky ablaze with stars. "What will you do after this is settled?" Rebecca asked. Thomas gazed into the darkness. "Clear my name fully, then? I'm not sure. Denver holds too many memories now." "Of your family," Rebecca ventured carefully. Thomas nodded. "Influenza took them 3 years ago while I was away on business. My wife, Sarah, and our daughter, Lily, she was 6. His voice caught. "I wasn't there to read her bedtime stories when she needed me most." Rebecca placed her hand over his. "I'm sorry, Thomas." He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "What about you? Will you stay here? This land is all I have to give Emma. James and I built this place from nothing." She looked out at the dark silhouettes of her small herd of cattle. "It's not much, but it's ours." "It's everything," Thomas said softly. "A home, purpose, family." The word hung between them, full of meaning and possibility. The next morning, Thomas prepared to ride to Rosewood. As he mounted his horse, Rebecca handed him a small package of food for the journey. "Be careful," she said. "Blackwell won't surrender easily." "I will." He hesitated, then added, "May I call on you when this is over?" Rebecca's smile was like sunrise after a long night. "We'll be waiting." Thomas rode into Rosewood with determination, unaware that Blackwell had already fled town after learning the sheriff had reviewed the evidence. At the sheriff's office, Thomas provided his formal statement, corroborated by telegrams from the federal marshal in Denver. "Blackwell's likely headed for California," Sheriff Mills explained. "I've wired authorities along the way, but with his money, he might still escape justice." "What about his men?" Thomas asked. "Two arrested, including his accountant who's willing to testify in exchange for leniency. The others scattered." The sheriff handed Thomas an official document. "This clears your name, Mr. Ashford. The bank in Denver has been notified that you were working with federal authorities." Thomas felt the weight of months on the run lifting from his shoulders. "Thank you, Sheriff." "Don't thank me. If Mrs. Rayburn hadn't stood her ground, I might have made a terrible mistake." The sheriff shook his head. "That woman has more courage than most men I know." "Yes," Thomas agreed, "she does." On his ride back to Rebecca's homestead, Thomas's mind filled with possibilities he hadn't dared consider since losing his family. The empty future that had stretched before him now seemed to offer a second chance. Rebecca was mending fence near the road when she spotted him approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, her heart quickening at the sight of him returning. "Good news," she called as he drew near. Thomas dismounted with a smile. "My name is cleared. Blackwell has fled, but his operation is exposed. I'm glad." She studied his face. "What will you do now?" Before he could answer, Emma came running from the house, her face alight with excitement. "Mr. Ashford, did you catch the bad men? Will you read to me tonight?" Thomas knelt to the child's level. "Some of them, yes. And I would be honored to read to you tonight, Miss Emma." Over supper, Thomas shared the details of his meeting with the sheriff. As dusk fell, Emma insisted on her story, and Thomas read with the same care and attention as before, his voice painting pictures of distant lands and brave heroes. With Emma asleep, Rebecca and Thomas again found themselves on the porch, the prairie stretching before them under moonlight. "I received an interesting offer today," Thomas said after a comfortable silence. "The bank in Silver Creek needs a manager. The previous one was involved with Blackwell." Rebecca turned to him. "That sounds like a good opportunity." "It would mean staying in the territory." His eyes met hers. "Near here, how near?" Her voice was soft but steady. "As near as you would permit." Thomas took a deep breath. "Rebecca, I know it's soon, perhaps too soon, but these past days have awakened feelings I thought were buried forever. I don't expect anything, but I would like to call on you properly, if you're willing." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her gaze on the distant mountains. "When James died, I thought that part of my life was over. I had Emma, the ranch. It seemed enough." She looked at Thomas. "But hearing you read to her, seeing how she lights up around you, I realized it might not be enough for her. And for you?" Thomas asked gently. "For me?" Rebecca's voice softened. "For me, it was the way you started," again slower when I asked. "The way you listened. Not many men in this territory know how to do that." Thomas carefully reached for her hand. "I would very much like to listen to you, Rebecca Rayburn, for as long as you'll allow." She turned her palm up, entwining her fingers with his. "I think I would like that, Thomas Ashford." Through the spring of 1876, Thomas established himself at the Silver Creek Bank while courting Rebecca with respectful dedication. Every Sunday, he rode the 15 miles to her homestead, sometimes bringing small gifts, a new book for Emma, seeds for Rebecca's garden, or simply his presence and willing hands for the endless tasks of ranch life. They spoke of their lost spouses openly, honoring those memories while carefully building something new. Rebecca found herself looking forward to his visits, planning special meals and wearing her best dress, small indulgences that reminded her she was not only a mother and rancher but also a woman. Emma blossomed under Thomas's attention. He helped with her reading lessons, listened to her stories, and taught her simple arithmetic using pebbles and sticks. On warm evenings, they would sit under the big cottonwood tree, Thomas pointing out constellations and explaining how travelers use stars to navigate. By midsummer, Thomas had become a familiar figure at church socials and community gatherings, always at Rebecca's side. Town gossip naturally followed, but most people approved of the match, a respectable banker and a hard-working widow with complementary strengths. On a golden August evening, with the first hint of autumn crispness in the air, Thomas arrived with a special delivery, a rocking chair he had commissioned from the town's carpenter. "For story time," he explained as two ranch hands helped unload it from his wagon. "Every proper home needs a good reading chair." Rebecca ran her hand over the polished wood, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's beautiful, Thomas." That night, after Emma was asleep, they sat together on the porch, the new chair creaking gently as Rebecca rocked. "I've been thinking," Thomas said, his voice serious. "The ride between Silver Creek and here is becoming increasingly impractical." Rebecca's heart stuttered. "Was he tiring of their arrangement? I see," she said carefully. "No, I don't think you do." Thomas took her hand. "Rebecca, I want to eliminate that ride altogether. I want to be here with you and Emma every day." He knelt before her rocking chair. "I'm asking if you would do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife." Rebecca's breath caught. Despite the growing closeness between them, she hadn't expected this step so soon. "Thomas, are you certain? This ranch, this life, it's not like banking in Denver." "I've never been more certain of anything." His eyes held hers. "I lost one family because I was too focused on building a future to enjoy the present. I won't make that mistake again. You and Emma are the present I want, and the future too, if you'll have me." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes. Emma should have a say as well. She lost her father so young. "Of course," Thomas agreed. "We'll speak with her together." The next morning over breakfast, Thomas and Rebecca sat Emma down for a serious conversation. "Emma," Rebecca began, "Mr. Ashford has asked a very important question, and we both want to know how you feel about it." Emma looked between them curiously. "What question?" Thomas leaned forward. "I've asked your mother if I might join your family permanently, as her husband, and if you would allow it, as someone who would be honored to be a father to you." Emma's fork clattered against her plate. "You want to be my new pa." "Not to replace your real father," Thomas clarified quickly. "No one could ever do that. But yes, I would like to be a father to you, to be here every day, to read stories and teach you and watch you grow." Emma was quiet for a moment, her young face serious with thought. "Would you still read to me every night?" Thomas smiled. "Every single night that I'm able. And Mama, do you love her like Pa did?" Rebecca felt her cheeks warm at the directness of her daughter's question. Thomas met Emma's gaze steadily. "I do, very much, in a way that's new and different, but just as true." Emma nodded, apparently satisfied. "Then yes, I think that would be good." She paused, then added, "Can I call you Pa right away, or do I have to wait until after the wedding?" Rebecca laughed, relief and joy bubbling up inside her. "That's entirely between you and Thomas, sweetheart." Thomas's eyes shone with emotion. "You can call me whatever makes you comfortable, Emma. We have time to figure it all out." They were married in October, when the cottonwoods blazed golden against the blue Wyoming sky. The ceremony was held at the small church in Silver Creek, with Emma as the beaming flower girl and most of the community in attendance. Rebecca wore a new dress of deep blue silk and extravagance Thomas had insisted upon, with her mother's cameo at her throat. Thomas stood tall in a black suit, watching with wonder as she walked toward him on the arm of her neighbor, Mr. Peterson, who had known James Rayburn since their cattle drive days. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promising patience, honesty, and partnership through whatever life brought them. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Rebecca with a gentle reverence that spoke of all they had both lost and found. The celebration afterward was a proper frontier affair, with tables groaning under the weight of potluck dishes, a fiddler playing dance tunes, and children racing between the adults' legs. Emma proudly introduced Thomas as "my new pa" to anyone who would listen, her happiness obvious to all. As twilight fell, the newly formed family returned to the ranch, now their shared home. Thomas had arranged for neighboring women to transform the cabin while they were at the church, adding touches that blended his possessions with the existing furnishings. New curtains hung in the windows, the pantry was fully stocked, and their wedding quilt sewn by the church ladies lay across the expanded bed. "Welcome home," Rebecca said softly as they crossed the threshold. "Home," Thomas repeated, savoring the word. "I never thought I'd feel that again." That night, after Emma was tucked in with a special wedding day story, husband and wife discovered each other with tender passion, healing old wounds and creating new bonds in the sanctuary of their shared room. In the morning, Emma found them in the kitchen, Thomas teaching Rebecca how to make his mother's special breakfast biscuits, flour dusting both their clothes as they laughed together. The sight cemented in the child's mind that this new arrangement was going to work just fine. The seasons turned, and the small family settled into rhythms of their own making. Thomas maintained his position at the bank, but arranged his schedule to be home before dusk most days. Rebecca continued managing the ranch operations, grateful for Thomas's head for figures when it came to cattle sales and supply purchases. They hired 2 permanent ranch hands, allowing the operation to grow modestly while ensuring Rebecca wasn't overworked. Thomas built a proper study off the main room, with bookshelves that gradually filled with volumes ordered from Denver and even Chicago. Every evening without fail, no matter how busy the day had been, Thomas read to Emma before bed. Rebecca often joined them, the three huddled together in the rocking chair or on Emma's bed, lost in worlds of imagination. When spring arrived again, Rebecca discovered she was expecting a child. The news filled the household with excitement, especially from Emma, who had been praying for a sibling since the wedding. "Will you still have time to read to me when the baby comes?" she asked Thomas one evening, a hint of worry in her voice. "Absolutely," he assured her. "Reading time is sacred. Besides, the baby will need to learn how important stories are in this family." As Rebecca's pregnancy progressed, Thomas took on more household responsibilities, insisting she rest properly. The town doctor visited regularly, pronouncing mother and child healthy but reminding them that at 34, Rebecca should take extra precautions. On a crisp September morning in 1877, after a long night of labor with the midwife and doctor in attendance, Rebecca gave birth to a son. They named him James Thomas Ashford, honoring both the past and present. When Emma was finally allowed to see her mother and new brother, Thomas lifted her onto the bed beside Rebecca. The girl stared in wonder at the tiny red face. "He's so small," she whispered. "You are even smaller," Rebecca told her, stroking her daughter's hair. "Can I read to him tonight?" Emma asked. "Since you're tired," Thomas and Rebecca exchanged a glance of shared pride in their daughter's compassion. "That would be wonderful," Thomas said. "I think your brother would like that very much." That evening, a new tradition began. Emma sat in the rocking chair, her brother cradled carefully in Thomas's arms beside her, as she slowly and carefully read The 3 Little Pigs from her primer. She stumbled over some words, but neither Thomas nor Rebecca corrected her, allowing her the dignity of her first storytelling. As baby James grew, so did the ranch and their contentment. Thomas eventually left the bank to focus entirely on the ranch operations, expanding their herd and adding a small apple orchard that Rebecca had always dreamed of planting. Emma thrived in school, her natural intelligence nurtured by her parents' encouragement and the nightly reading sessions that continued without fail. Young James, sturdy and curious, toddled after his sister everywhere, watching her with adoring eyes. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Thomas surprised Rebecca with a specially bound collection of Robin Hood stories, custom-made in Denver with illustrations and fine paper. "For our family library," he explained, watching her trace the embossed cover with reverent fingers. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch, the book between them, watching the endless stars of the Wyoming sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Rebecca asked suddenly. "Giving up banking, city life?" Thomas turned to her, his face illuminated by the soft glow from the window. "Not for a single moment." He reached for her hand. "You once asked me to start again, slower. That was the best advice anyone ever gave me." Rebecca leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. "Read to me," she requested softly. Thomas opened the book, his voice warm in the quiet night. "In the days of good King Richard, there lived a famous outlaw in the great forest of Sherwood." Rebecca closed her eyes, letting the familiar words wash over her, carried on the voice of the man she loved. Their story, unlike the one in the book, was still being written day by day, page by page, in a life richer and fuller than either had dared hope for after their losses. And every night, without fail, stories continued to be read in the Ashford household, sometimes by Thomas, sometimes by Rebecca, and increasingly by Emma as she grew older. The tradition passed to James as he learned to read, and eventually to the twin girls who joined the family 2 years later. In a territory known for its harshness, they had created a haven of words and warmth, of stories shared and lives intertwined. The widow and the bookkeeper, who had both lost so much, had found, in each other and in their blended family, the courage to begin again, to read life's story with the care and attention it deserved. On summer evenings, neighbors passing by the Ashford ranch could often hear the murmur of a voice from the open windows, sometimes a man's deep tones, sometimes a woman's gentler cadence, sometimes a child's careful pronunciation, all telling stories that bridged past and present, weaving together the narrative of a family that had discovered how to turn each page with the reverence it deserved, savoring each word of their shared story, one day at a time.